Okay, so I'm going to talk about integrating Xamarin into a continuous build situation. I'm going to do it two ways. So this is the first way is the way I currently do it, and the second way is thanks to the new Microsoft TFS 2015 and Visual Studio Online. They now have new build agents and stuff, which actually include direct support for Xamarin in them. So that makes it much easier to set this thing up. So I'll show you the way that I did it first, and then the new way after that. So I'll go to the PowerPoint. So that's basically what I'm going to be talking about tonight. Okay, so I have to make a few assumptions though, because this can go down so many rabbit holes if I don't set some assumptions that you guys already understand. So basically, you need a Xamarin solution that already builds correctly and stuff. You also need to understand and be able to, at this point, get a package that you can already submit to stores, because you have to understand things like iOS provisioning profiles, Android key store files and stuff like that, because I've set all that up beforehand because I don't have time to go to, because they are individual topics within themselves, especially with the provisioning profile stuff if you want to do side loading to devices. TestFlight made it easier, but it still, if you still have to support iOS 7, you still have to do some manual side loading a lot of the time if you're doing testing. And basically, you've already got Xamarin installed on and working on your Mac, which would be a prerequisite for the first two. And also Visual Studio 2015, because this will set up nearly everything automatically for you. You can do it with 2013, but then you have to go and grab all the bits and pieces yourself. So 2015, you just press it, you go, I want to do cross-platform mobile development with Xamarin, and it installs everything. It's awesome. So we'll start with the old method, which is Visual Studio Online and Jenkins, which is the build server that I chose. Couple of resources you need. You need Jenkins.app, which basically allows you to have Jenkins as a little icon that sits in your dock. It's easier to do than having to deal with your own Java web server thing. You need to grab Team Explorer Everywhere, which is essentially a bunch of command line tools and optionally an Eclipse plugin for the Mac that allows you to grab stuff from TFS. Because this is all based on a TFVC, the older style TFS source control rather than Git. I do use Git for the second one because they haven't added TFVC support yet to the new pages, but it's coming. And a lot of this I did base off the existing documentation from Xamarin, so at least the first part of it anyway. So that's very useful too. So essentially, I'll show you the Windows Phone one first because it's the easiest one actually. You can set up your own TFS build server and stuff, but the one on Visual Studio Online actually works perfectly, the hosted build controller. So I'll just load Visual Studio 2015 up. I'm still on the RC because they haven't added Windows 10 app support to the final version until tomorrow, so you have to stay on the RC if you wanted to build Windows 10 apps. So I can upgrade tomorrow. But yeah. Slow. I should have loaded this up beforehand. So connect to my TFVC one, which is this one. And basically for this project, I've used just one of the sample Xamarin projects because it's already there, it builds, it's cross-platform. So that's just the sample project I'm using.
Do you expect us to see that?
Oh, sorry, it's not coming up again.
Yeah.
Sorry. There we go. Cool. Okay. So essentially in the Team Explorer, I go to Builds. This is all dependent on internet speed too, so there we go. And so essentially you make a new build definition. And you've just got to set a couple of settings up to make it work with Xamarin. So, firstly, continuous integration. That means it will build every time you check in, which is awesome. I just went and added in, I just got to point it to where in my solution folder is. So that's just there, it's just the root folder and all the bits sit inside it. So that's where it'll find the solution file. I'm using the hosted build controller. Again, if you had your own TFS server, you can pick that. I get it to copy all the built things up to the TFS server, so it's just there. And the important stuff here is in the process tab. So, wait. So essentially, I just wanted to build the solution file, and I wanted to build just the Windows Phone version. I made a solution configuration called Demo Windows Phone. But yeah, you don't want it to try and build the iOS and Android ones because it will fail, especially the iOS one because it's not on a Mac. And then I also, the only other really important one is you've got to set the build platform to x86, otherwise it just dies, it errors out. And once you do that, you can just, every time you check in some code, it will build the Windows Phone app, and you can find the results of it up at Visual Studio Online. So these are some of the ones I did last night. I can grab the packages out there, so your zap file or your Apex file is in there. You got your build logs and stuff. It's all there. So that's the easy one because it's just you can just use the hosted online. So for Android and iOS though, I have to use Jenkins. So that involves going over to my Mac.
That's the Mac server you've got set up at home
Yes.
at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's my Mac at home. And this cursor's really laggy, so this will be fun. So, gee, that's laggy. So down on the taskbar I have this guy called Jenkins. So essentially you just download that Jenkins app and you just install it and you run it. And it sets up a little server. Thankfully I don't have to actually look at that on the web because it's all managed via a web page. So here it is here. Let's log on to it. So you have to set up a couple of things on it. Firstly, you've got to install 3 plugins. One is the environmental injector plugin. This allows you to set environmental variables for things so that you can put your key store password and paths to things so they have to manually type them out for each of the definitions you build. They're just variables you can just keep. You've got to install the TFS plugin if you're using TFS, which is what I'm doing. And you've got to install MS Build because that is what lets you build the Xamarin project because they're .NET. So you just basically just search for them and you can install them. As you can see here, I've already got them installed, MS Build and TFS. You then have to do some configuration. So you go to System, and you've got to set a few things. So you've got to point it to where MS Build is, and Xamarin always puts it in that folder. So user bin xbuild, which is a shortcut or an alias to where Xamarin actually puts it, which is good. You've got to put your path to where your TF executable is. So I usually just put that in the developer folder under TE for Team Explorer, where you can put that wherever you want. So it knows where to find that. you want to create a couple of users because you don't want this to be entirely insecure, because when you first get it, it's just lets anybody log into it. So what I generally do is I make an admin account, which can literally do everything. And then I make a remote build account, which is the one that Visual Studio Online will call every time. And it only has permissions to literally read and build. That's all it can do. So if that password gets loose, it's not such a bad thing. Somebody can just call builds on your server. Not that the passwords should get loose anyway. So then you've got to create a couple of jobs. So start with iOS, because this is one that has to be done on the Mac. So when you go and you make builds, actually, you just go new item, and you just make a freestyle project. So this brings you this screen that you'll see here. So you give your project a name. You give it the path and the details for your TFS server. So for Visual Studio Online, it's that /default collection. That's just what it always is. Then you give it the path to your project, which is $ the project name that you gave your project, which is the same as the one at the top there. And then whatever folder you put it in. Then you've got to give it some details. So you actually have to enable at the moment, the less secure alternative logins. So you basically go up to your name, you go to My Profile, and you go to Security, and you go to Alternate Authentication. And so you just have to give it just a regular username and password, because normally you log on with your Microsoft account, you've got two-factor authentication if you've got that set up, which you really should have that set up. But this is a bit, it doesn't understand two-factor and stuff, so you've got to give it this alternative method to get in. So it's just a basic username and password. It wants your email address, because it's the domain name, but the password's the password. So then to be able to trigger builds remotely, it needs an authentication token. Mine's just called Build Me, because I'm not worried about security. You probably set that to something a lot more secure. And then the key here is that this is the command it's got to run, so it's very specific. By the way, all these commands, I'm actually writing a blog post later this week, so you don't actually have to remember all these commands. I'm going to actually have them all in written form, so you will actually be able to step through this and recreate this whole thing yourself. Because seriously, there's a lot of just random commands and stuff that I don't expect anybody to remember. Essentially, though, you're calling this thing called MD tool, which lives inside the Xamarin Studio app, and you're telling it to build, and again, you pick your configuration, which in this case is I want a release version of my iPhone app. And you say that's the solution file. A lot of extra stuff that's somebody's added. That shouldn't be there. Okay. Cool.
And these are Xamarin command line build, yeah.
Yeah. So, and once I hit that, I can now, I can test that it works by just going build, and it will build my project. If you really enjoy watching how Xamarin actually puts stuff together and stuff, you can actually sit there and watch this command output. It's very, very fascinating. It tells you what's wrong, which is good, because it often fails. You can be like, oh. But we won't actually sit there and watch that. We'll go to the Android one. Android's a bit different to iOS, of course. So the top of the stuff all is the same. So the project name, the path, that's all the same. The build token, that's all the same. Android has a few extra things though. You need to put the variables for your key store file. So this is the password to the key store file, so that it can sign your app, so it can actually be used in production. The reason why we put it up here is so that in the build logs it doesn't actually write the password out, because that's not good. You don't want your logs to have your password in it. Which is why we tick this box here. Then the steps of the build are you build an MS, you do an MS build thing. and this time you're building just the project file, again, release configuration, and you say package for Android. You have to inject a bunch of environmental variables, which is why you have to have that plugin before. So the location to your key store file, the alias of your key store file. Again, I'm not going to go into how key store files work, but if you are building release versions of Xamarin Apps or any Android apps, actually, you'll understand that. And then there's a process of signing and zip aligning your Android thing, which is basically just its way of verifying that you're actually building these packages when you upload them to the store. Google's like, it'll check that you've actually signed it and that the same person keeps signing it, so that nobody could like hack your Android account and just upload apps. It won't let users do updates unless the signatures are the same. So you set all these various paths because so the location to your Android SDK, the name of the final version of the APK you want, because it goes through a stage where it signs it, makes a file, then you need to zip align it, and then you get the final file at the end. And the last thing to do is run this command, which uses all of those environmental variables to actually build the thing. So it zip aligns it, it produces this file. Let's go back and see if the iOS one's nearly done. Oh, it's internet, so it's, yeah. Internet is slow, so it should build up. So that is Jenkins. That's just actually getting it to build. So now you would say, well, okay, it's not the continuous integration part though, and this is where we have to use a feature of Visual Studio Online called service hooks, which basically sends pings to that Jenkins server whenever you check something in. So to do that, you go up to your settings in Visual Studio Online. Actually, sorry, you've got to go into your project first. Then you go to your settings. Then you go to service hooks. And so I've created one here, and I'm actually going to create another one as the example. So Jenkins, I want it to happen when my code is checked in. If you have multiple branches and stuff, you can actually set the subdirectories which those branches are made up, so that say you've got different features going and you basically say, I only want to build a package off this branch if something's checked into that branch. So you're not building stuff off branches that you're not checking into. So then you grab your, the base Jenkins URL is the website that your Jenkins server is hosted at. The username is that account that you made, and I call mine remote build. So if I go to manage users, I call mine remote build. The API token can be retrieved by going to remote build and going to configure, and then that's the user's API token, so I can copy and paste that in. And if all that works correctly, I've got the drop down there of all my jobs, so it did work correctly, so I can pick, I want to do that one. My build token was just build me. As I said, you would make that a lot more secure. And then finish. So now, whenever I check code in, so if I go up here to Visual Studio Online, I'm just going to change something. So I'll just add theoretically, that should trigger builds. So if I go to my hope it actually works. Okay, so it's just triggered a build. So one failed. Can have a look why. That one's still going. Oh, we're still going. But yeah, it's triggering these builds. So yeah, that's essentially Jenkins. So that's the old way we had to do things. It's the disadvantages of it is a little bit complex to set up, and it doesn't, because it's just using the service hooks, you don't get the stuff that you with the Windows Phone. So with the Windows Phone one that I first described, you can have it do things like email you when a build fails. It's copying up all those packages up to Visual Studio Online so that they're safe, they're not stored on a local server, etc., etc., etc. You've got different places where you're going to manage. So the Windows Phone one's managed in the XAML builds part of Visual Studio. The Android and iOS ones are managed in Jenkins. It's a bit separated, it's a bit cobbled together. Thankfully, Microsoft has adopted a cross-platform solution for a lot of this stuff that doesn't involve Jenkins. So this is what I'm more excited about. This is the way we have it working currently at where I work. So it does work. It makes packages for us every day. It's been going good for 9 months now. But I think this new way is better. There's a small proviso though. They're still working on this. This is still in preview, so it's probably not production ready yet. And the fact that I've found many bugs in the actual code while trying to set this demo up, which frustrated me. That was tricky. But the good thing is that this is all just based on Node.js, so all these JavaScript files are just sitting on your system, so you can actually go and just fix all the bugs. And it's also on GitHub, so a lot of the bugs that I didn't know why people had already fixed, and there's already pull requests sitting up there for Microsoft to review and put into newer versions of this product. So some of the things I'm just like, oh, that guy fixed that, so copied and pasted his code into this JavaScript file and bam, it worked. So this is going to be better. It's just, especially the cross-platform, it's not quite ready yet. But I'll show you anyway, because it's awesome. And the other thing is, at the moment, this doesn't support TFVC properly yet. It only supports Git, which is why I had to make a Git project as well. So, we'll go to my Surface. This is the same machine that's currently filming me too, so it'll have a video of me in the corner of it. So that'll be a bit weird. Anyway, so on Windows, this agent is just a PowerShell script that you run. So I'll show you where to download it. If you go to here, to agent pools. So for Windows, you can download this agent. As you can see, the Mac one's already enabled. The Windows one I'm going to start up. But you download it, it's just a zip file. You can download as many of these things. You can have like 70 of these things running on the same computer if you want. You just keep starting them up. Probably not a good idea to have 70 on one computer though, unless it's really powerful. So you run this thing called configureagent1.ps1. So it asks you for the name of the agent. You can just give it a name. The defaults that it has are already set because I've already set this thing up before. You enter the name of your TFS server. You can set them up in different pools so that you've got different types of resources, and you can say, well, this project's built with that, etc., etc. But I just use the default pool for now. You can give it a folder. Again, I leave that as a default. You can install this as a service so that it automatically just boots up on the computer when you start it, so you don't have to actively run this thing interactively, so no one can accidentally shut the thing down. Not that if you're running the service, someone should have direct access to it anyway. And so then it's going to ask me to log in. And this one does support the Microsoft account, so the Windows one at least, you don't have to use the alternative credentials. So the agent is now logging in. And it's about to say it's ready.
That was your build agent for Android or iOS? Or
Okay, so one of the limitations I found here is that at the moment, this is what I mean about it not being finished. The Mac version of this build agent doesn't understand Xamarin.iOS for some reason. It was installed, but it won't detect it, and I can't make it work.
Right.
So, in the last case, I was building Windows on a Windows machine and iOS and Android on a Mac.
Yeah.
In this situation, I'm building Windows and Android on the Windows machine. I'm building iOS just on the Mac. Hopefully, once they get this thing more stable, it will understand Xamarin iOS on the Mac, Xamarin Android on the Mac as well, hopefully. Okay, so it's running. So I can exit out of the remote of that computer because I won't need that anymore. Where's that? So now they're both running. So the Windows one, see, it detects all the things that are on your computer. And the Mac one detects that I've got Xamarin iOS, but doesn't detect Xamarin.Android for some reason. So again, they're still working on it. So it'll be good once that happens. So then the rest of this, I'll show you how to start the one on the Mac up as well, because I'll do them both at the same time. So on the Mac, you use Node.js. So I'll shut this down. Start it. So on Windows, you just download the zip file. On Mac, you actually go and you install Node, and you go to the Node package manager and you install this package called the VSO agent installer, and then you just run that command every time you want to stamp out a new build agent. Again, you can stamp out as many of these things as you want. You make a new folder, you run the Node command to install it, puts it in the folder. It's basically the same as what you're doing on Windows when you're just unzipping the zip and running the PowerShell. And then you just basically go in that particular folder, you just go Node VSO agent. It asks you for the alternative credentials. So the Windows one can do the OAuth secure one, the Mac one can't at the moment. So you've got to use the old school passwords. Again, the curious one about the Windows one too is the Windows one asks you the same questions every time, even after you've set it up. The Mac one remembers the questions other than the username and password. So they're a little bit different in terms of how they work, but you'd be asked, if you're setting up for the first time, you ask the same questions. Where's the Visual Studio server? What folder do you want to put it in? What agent do you want to put? What name you want to give to the agent, etc. So the rest of it now can all be done through Visual Studio Online, which is awesome. It's one place to manage all of the build stuff. So I'm in my Git project here. I go to the Build tab, and my definitions are here. So I'll start with iOS, and I'll show you this. There's actually a step called Xamarin.iOS. It's awesome. You don't have to worry about all those different commands and stuff. They've actually built this thing. So you basically can just tell it your solution, where you want it to build from, the configuration you want to do. So if you wanted to build debug builds on the build server, you could, but you would probably want to just do release builds. You tick that you want to do continuous integration, so it builds every time. You pick your pool, because there's a hosted one and there's a, the default one's the one that I'm using because that's where all my computers are. You can't use the hosted one for iOS because there's no Macs up in Visual Studio Online. There is a Xamarin Android one all set up in Visual Studio Online for you in the hosted build. They've actually done that. It currently only runs the version 4.20 though. They haven't updated it to Xamarin 5.0 or 5.1 yet, so it's a bit old. That's the one thing about using the hosted build servers, you don't get to control what version they put up there. It's their version. So if they're too fast for you or they're too slow for you, and the demands are basically what I want. So basically all this particular one needs to know is Xamarin iOS needs to be installed on this build server, which it is. The other thing too is they've got a history of all the changes you make to this build definition. So if you make a change to your build definition and you go, oh, that broke it, you can go back and find the difference and you can undo it and everything. It's great. And the second step I've got here is that I just want to copy up the contents of the bin folder to the Visual Studio Online server once I'm done, so that I've got the actual copies stored. I think by default it deletes them after 10 days, but you can actually pick individual builds and say I want to retain them for longer than that. You release builds, you might do that, for example. I think you might be able to do it indefinitely. If I go here, yeah, I can retain them indefinitely. I think it definitely still does it for a limited amount of time though, so you probably want to copy them elsewhere, but let's see. Xamarin Android, again the same stuff, you just pick your project. Your target is just package for Android. And these are all the same, so again I'm just doing release. I want continuous integration. The default queue. So again, this is the one where you can pick if you really didn't want to set up an Android build server, although if you go into the effort of doing iOS and Windows, you would just use the Xamarin one at the same time, I think. But you can if you want. So that's all the same. It does the step of the Android signing, so you just got to give it your details with my extremely secure passwords. It will zip align it for you. It does all the commands for you, just tick it, and if you've got all your paths set up correctly, which I'll put in the blog post, it just finds everything for you.
They're not masked, those passwords.
No, these ones aren't
Yeah.
masked, which is why you'd be very careful about who you let on this site. I agree, I saw that and I went, great, you didn't mask the passwords.
And is that like, so anyone who had build developer access to your VSO would be able to see?
Yes.
Android signing stuff too.
Yeah, which is
Like
pretty
how
damn
you
important.
publish it.
Yeah.
And it's developer specific, isn't it, the signing stuff? Is it
No,
company
this is
specific?
the password you use for your organisation.
Right.
So yeah, you probably want to restrict who you let onto this tab. That might be a request that's to send to Microsoft is, can you please mask the passwords? And again, popping it up there to the Visual Studio Online service. When it comes to the hosted server, my question that might be in line is, how am I using the hosted server if Xamarin requires a license to use? One of the build steps you can actually add is, where is it?
It's just
Yeah, you can actually get it to activate and deactivate your Xamarin licenses for you on the fly. So that's that. I found that very interesting. They might have also, the other thing I didn't put into any of these demos was unit testing or anything like that. Which again, scope, it would just get too long of a to add all that in. But you can have it automatically sync up with Xamarin Test Cloud which you get the 60 minutes for free, which is nice now. So you could probably just add that in as a step and configure that. There's a lot of commands here, so you don't even have to use Xamarin if you didn't want to. You could do regular builds for Android apps and iOS apps and Windows Phone apps. Running scripts, PowerShell commands, Gulp and Grunt if you had JavaScript things you needed to package as part of your steps. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can just add with GUI and stuff. It's really nice. And then the Windows Phone build. Again, this is pretty, you just pick your solution and you go through here and I'm doing the Windows Phone release build for continuous integration. Yeah, and then I'm copying those up to the build to Visual Studio Online as well. So if I go here and I again change some code, it should trigger all these builds at once, which is probably going to be interesting on my home internet connection. Let me see. So all three builds have been queued, and I can actually sit there and oh, sorry, failed. So the iOS one occasionally does that. It seems to be the first time after you start the agent, the authentication with Git fails, but usually once you run that a second time, it works again. So yeah, again, they're working. There's bugs, so. You can sit there and watch the logs and stuff if you want. Okay. Yeah, it's working this time. So it builds it and then it'll publish it up. If I go back to the other two, they should be running. So the Windows Phone one already completed. Yeah. Less than a minute ago. So if I go there, I've got the logs. I can grab the zap file. If you spend a bit more time configuring it, you can probably even just upload the zap files. I've just told it to do the whole bin directory, but you can go much more specific and go, I just really only want you to upload the zap file, so that's the only thing that's sitting up there. Save your internet connection. If I go to back here, internet. I hope the internet hasn't just died on me. Thankfully I'm at the end, so it won't matter too much. I'm waiting for that. So here's some of the documentation that you might want to read. So for this, for setting up all the new, they call it basically vNext is what they've been referring to. I'm sure they call it now 2015 build, but it's also on Visual Studio Online, so that's what I've been using. That's the documentation there. The GitHub, where they actually have a lot of this code. Hopefully I can get that to load. That's going to put me back into extended mode again. Oh cool, this is working again. So the Xamarin iOS one's still going. But the Xamarin Android finished, the Windows Phone finished, the iOS one's still going. But yeah, here's the code for that VSO agent. Here's how to install it and everything like that. Here's all the bug fixes that are going on and all the issues that people have raised. So where was the bug that I had last night? Oh, that was the task one. Tasks. Yes. one of these ones was the one I found last night that I had trouble with. So that's it. They, I think it was this one. Yeah, that's one of the ones I fixed. So they've already closed that issue. So yeah, they fixed that since last night. So they're working on it. But yeah, I'll go down to the PowerPoint. So yeah, any questions? Sorry, I went through this quite quickly. It's one of those things where it's really hard to go through step by step because it just takes a long time. I had to kind of go through it quite quickly. Again, I haven't finished writing it yet, but I'm gonna write a whole blog post about this so you can actually sit there and read it at your leisure and copy and paste the commands and stuff. That'll be coming soon. But yeah, any questions?
Might be like a basic one. Might be more of a CI one than necessarily what you were showing. So you can configure it to do tests as well. Where are the tests from? How do you define that, like, without getting into like a rabbit hole?
So you would have so we've got the iOS, Android, and Windows Phone projects. You normally have a fourth project with all your tests in it.
Yeah.
And so one of the steps there is just run all the tests in this project. That's how we normally do it. That's how we do it at work. We've got a test project, and it can refer to all the other projects.
And if you want to test like platform specific stuff?
I'm not entirely sure about that. At the moment, we're just unit testing the key core business logic rather than the UI or the platform specific stuff. I think that would probably be a bit trickier. Xamarin Test Cloud might have. I'm sure it can do that. I haven't looked a lot into that. So yeah. Any other questions?
Have you got a link to your blog?
Yes, that is the last slide.
Can you actually run any of this stuff not in the online version of Visual Studio?
Yeah, so all the stuff that I showed you on Visual Studio there, that's all included in TFS 2015. So that's not even out yet. So that's in RC2 at the moment. I suspect that'll be out within the next 2 weeks. They said it wasn't far off. They wanted to release it last Monday at the same time as everything else, but they wanted to just squish a couple more bugs in relation to upgrading from TFS 2013 to 2015 if you were doing that migration. So they said, we'll hold off a couple of weeks just to make sure this is all working properly. But yeah, unfortunately a lot of that is not included in 2013. If you want to do the Jenkins method, it works in 2013, but I think is service hooks included. I think you can do the Jenkins method in 2013, but for 2015 you need to do all this new build.
TSX license for that, or version of Visual Studio for that, or?
Well, you have to license all your TFS and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
No TFS license stick.
No, Pro.
no, that'll cost you a bit.
But you could use Jenkins to build your Windows stuff as well.
You can install Jenkins on Windows, I think. Yeah. So you'd have to install it on Windows to be able to do that. You wouldn't be able to build the Windows Phone on the Mac, I don't believe, because you need to have the Windows Phone SDK and everything installed. Yeah, I've never explored that because there is a free version of the TFS build server, but I'm pretty sure large corporations can't use that. That's just a home version, an express version. I'm pretty sure that's specifically licensed for just very small organizations.
But the first example you did work with GitHub as well, right? Or not?
Okay, yes. So I don't personally use Git. So the fact that I had to use Git for the second
not GitHub.
The fact that I had to use Git for the second one was only because they haven't added the TFVC support in yet. But yeah, there is places in Jenkins where you can do Git. So if you had a Git server, that could also be your source control. I just don't know how you would do the automation stuff because it doesn't have the service hook stuff. Although really all it's doing is pinging that web address. So if you could figure out that, you could get it to automate the
Jenkins has full integration into Stash or Git or whatever.
Yeah. So
Jenkins can poll as well.
oh yes.
So as long as there's connectivity in that direction.
Yeah. Well, yes, you could say every 10 minutes, check if something's changed. We didn't do that at work because of the internet connection. We don't want it checking all the time. We just wanted
It
to
would
just build when
die.
it's told. Yeah, that would not be
Yeah.
ADSL1.
Mm.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's my Twitter. I retweet a lot of stuff, so seriously, turn that off if it's annoying you, if you feel the need to follow me. Seriously, there's a lot of not tech-related stuff that I just retweet, so.
There's a lot of tech stuff you tweet.
And there's a lot of tech stuff I retweet too. If you're really a fan of Paul Thurrott, you'll love my Twitter feed, because I retweet a lot of his stuff. Yeah, and I'm launching my website very, very soon, and one of the first articles up on that new site will be a blog post with all of these details and the nitty-gritty thing. But yeah, thank you for watching. I know it's a bit dry. Continuous integration isn't particularly interesting, but it's good if you want to just don't worry about builds. You just want to just check in and know that everything works. You want to get like an email to say, hey, it failed, so you can figure out who broke it.
Thanks,
Who did
I'll
it?
go fly, mate, so thanks for that.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.